the real impact of women in architecture has gone unrecognized for a long time.
Their ideas have shaped our neighborhoods and our homes,
but their names have been largely left out of the history that defines our profession.
That blind spot matters. It matters for how we see the past and for how we design and build for the future.
We wanted to have this conversation because you can't move forward if you ignore the work that built the foundations in the first place.
Bringing architectural historian and preservation expert Kate Regev into this conversation really levels up the depth of what we can uncover together.
Gābl Media is committed to advancing stories that shift our field.
So it only made sense that your girls from She Builds podcast host this new all-access exclusive live conversation.
We're calling it She Built This,
the hidden history of women in residential architecture.
We hope architects, educators, and anyone who cares about the built environment will see these women's stories as vital parts of our ongoing work.
And for members joining, there's AIA-approved continuing education credit for attending.
Welcome to Gābl Media All-Access. For those that don't know me, my name is Demetrius Lynch, and I am co-founder and chief creative officer at Gābl Media. And if you didn't know, Gābl Media is co-founded and led by two architects, and we've set out to tell the stories of not only the profession, but the building industry at large. Now, as people are coming into the session today, I invite you to jump into the chat, whether you're on YouTube or Riverside. Say hi, let us know where you're at, where you're coming from. So while you do that, I wanted to quickly tell you what this series is all about and why you should keep an eye out for future events. Gābl Media All-Access Series is an exclusive event where we bring together leading professionals from the AEC community in an intimate setting designed for meaningful connections and impactful discussions. Now, it's not intended to be your normal sort of webinar. This session offers Gābl Media members the unique opportunity to engage directly with industry leaders, exploring vital topics, discussing the latest trends, and identifying innovative solutions that are shaping the future of the AEC landscape. With limited participants, you'll have unparalleled access to ask your most pressing questions and gain groundbreaking insight that can propel your career and projects forward. But before we begin, few housekeeping items to get through. If you're not currently a member of Gābl Media, there's still a chance to receive AIA credit for today's session by becoming a member today. After the session, just go to gablmedia.com/members. That's GABL media.com/members and confirm that you participated in this event by providing the same email that you used to register for the event. Membership will get you credit for today's session, hold your spot for all future sessions, and you'll have access to our innovative podcast-based CE program, which we have 60 courses right now and more coming. So there's no more running around to events all over your city to try to track down credits. You just pop on a podcast, take a quick quiz after, and we'll do the rest from there. The last thing, you'll get inside scoop into all future Gābl Media events and perks. Gābl Media is an official AIA continuing education credit provider. There are particular standards that we have to meet, so feel free to contact us and AIA if there are any concerns about today's program. This session is not an endorsement by AIA of any materials or methods of dealing with products. The intent of this session has been reviewed and approved by AIA, so all Gābl Media members will receive one learning unit. So we will get into it today. This discussion is led by Norgery Rivas, Jessica Rogers, and Elizabeth Rahr, the ladies of She Builds Podcasts. Ladies, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Demetrius. And again, welcome everyone to She Built This, the hidden history of women in residential architecture. Today, we will be having a conversation exploring the historical roles women played in shaping residential architecture and affordable housing, shining light on stories and contexts that have been erased from history in hopes that we can better inform ourselves as designers and understand how this history of innovation and strategies can influence and even invigorate our projects and profession moving forward.
Yeah, we also aim to talk about real steps that architects and educators can take to bring these stories back into the spotlight, weave them into today's design conversations, and help shape a more inclusive, and in today's case, a more inclusive housing moving forward.
But before we get into all that, let's introduce ourselves.
Right?
Good idea.
I mean, yeah, right?
Who are we?
I'll start. I'm Elizabeth Rahr, but most people call me Lizzie. I'm an architect licensed in California, and I'm a project architect at Polsky Pearlstein Architects in Marin County. I've been working on single-family residential projects in the Bay Area for 11 years and hosting She Builds podcast for almost 5 years.
Well, I'm Jessica Rogers. I'm not an architect, but I'm the marketing coordinator here in South Florida for a small women-owned architecture firm. I do that by day, and then I'm 1/3 of She Builds podcast everywhere else. And who are you, Nodri?
I'm Nardiri Rivas. I'm the third of She Builds podcast. I'm an architect licensed in Texas and Puerto Rico, and I'm a project manager at eStudio Architecture in Houston. And supporting and empowering others in this profession is deeply important to me. And that passion fueled the idea to begin She Builds podcast with Jessica and Lizzie, where we share stories of women in the design and construction field through history and today. In those stories, we aim to shine a light on history that has been erased or ignored, and for every woman that we learn about to become a mentor or an inspiration to listeners.
Yes, our mission is to have women like Julia Morgan, Norma Maris-Scalaric, or Elizabeth Coit to be just as well known as Mies, Claire Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yeah. So we release our episodes in seasons. Each season is about 10 episodes, not about 10 episodes centered around a theme. Our next season is launching on August 5th, next week, Tuesday, and it'll focus around all things residential. As a residential architect, I'm very excited to talk about this subject and have this new season where we highlight women who focus on this project type. As Jessica mentioned, our goal is to bring these women who are active in the profession to light, but also to talk more about why the women in our new season or women in architectural history in general might have focused on residential architecture. And we decided that we should bring in some help to keep us on track and who has some expertise on this subject. And so we immediately thought of our friend Kate Regev.
Yeah. Hey, Kate. Okay. So Kate Regev is a licensed architect, project manager, historian, design writer, and educator with over a decade of experience in the design, construction, and preservation worlds. She currently works in-house at LaGuardia Community College in New York City, leading the design and construction of a 160,000 square foot workforce training and educational center. Previously, she worked in project management at back-end owner representation and at the architecture firm of Bayer, Blender, and Bell, both in New York. She also writes about architecture and design for publications like Architectural Digest and Dwell, teaches in the Historic Preservation Program at Columbia University, New York, consults on preservation projects, and authors a historical column at Madame Architect. That's how we came to know her from her work in Madame Architect. She's been quoted in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and Architectural Digest, and lectures across the country about architecture, preservation, and design. She holds a Master of Architecture and a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Columbia University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture cum laude from Barnard College at Columbia University. Welcome, Kate.
Yay! Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. You all know I'm a longtime listener and yeah.
Well, we have some questions that we talked about to get us started, just to lead the conversation. But we really hope that this is more of a conversation between the four of us. And with you, the audience members, please feel free to write in your thoughts or respond the questions yourselves. We want to hear from you. Our show is very conversational, and we want this event to reflect that and to hear from you as well.
let's talk about why we wanted to have this conversation too. Not only is Kate amazing in what she does, there was a couple of articles that she had written recently about housing that we thought was very pertinent to this conversation. But we thought this would be a great segue because next week we're launching our new season that, as Lizzie mentioned, is all things residential. So a lot of the topics that we're going to discuss today is going to be reflected in the stories that we start telling or that we're going to tell starting next week.
So welcome, Kate.
Yay!
Thank you all so much. I'm really excited to talk to everyone today and think about women in architecture and especially residential architecture. So thank you for having me.
Okay, so first off, Kate, you have a lot of experience uncovering hidden stories about women in our field. That's why we wanted you to join us. So what drew you to start in ink?
If I really think about it, my initial interest in researching women in architecture started when I was in graduate school. I had sort of heard over the years that there were some women who attended my architecture school, and yet there was no evidence of them in class, in any of our precedent research during studio. And I think I was also just kind of realizing I went to, in some ways, Barnard is an all-girls school, even though it's kind of under the Columbia University umbrella. And so I really had become interested in women's role in general in the world. And I felt like it was so missing in graduate school. So I won at graduation a research grant to look into some of the earliest graduates of Columbia's architecture school. And from there, I wrote some Wikipedia entries. I got involved in some local nonprofits and mentoring groups for women in architecture. I presented some of my research at conferences. And then about 5 years ago, I was approached by Julia Gamolina, who's the founder of Madame Architect, and she had been thinking about starting a new column that would focus on women in architecture in the past. And she asked if I would be interested in doing it, and I said yes, and that's sort of how that got started.
I love that. And I mean, we love the articles that you're doing for that, and we use that as a source for our show occasionally. I'm curious too, in your research, did you find that women in the early days of working in the profession were relegated to doing residential work because of their gender?
This is a great question. I think the easy answer is yes, but there are always some exceptions. And so there's a little bit of no in there. Some of the big early exceptions were women like Louise Blanchard Bethune, who was one of the earliest architects in America. And she practiced with her husband and then later a third partner in the 1870s, 1880s through the end of the 19th century. And she really did not focus on residential architecture. She did a lot of schools, a lot of hotels, a lot of public buildings, mostly in Buffalo, New York. But again, she's an exception. Most women who went to architecture school up until probably the past few decades did often find themselves kind of shuttled into residential architecture. And usually when I say residential architecture, I mean single family residences. There were assumptions about women's expertise, and because their place to live was the home, that made them experts in things like kitchen layouts and closets and things like that.
Yeah.
And especially in the mid to end of the 19th century were books like The American Woman's Home, that was by Catherine Beecher and her sister Harriet Beecher Stowe. And this book talked about, I mean, you can guess from the title, right? It's about the American woman's home. So the home belongs to the woman. That's her place. And it did talk about things like decorating and design ideas for the home. But I would say really the bigger concept was that the idea of a home is intrinsically tied to women, and that's their place. And so as women,
That's their domain.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was their domain. And so for the few women that might have ventured outside of the home and gotten education in architecture, the idea was that even if they did get that education, they would just bring it right back into the home and design homes and kitchens and things like that. But the truth is that I think many women, you know, like you, Lizzie, really love designing homes. I think that there's really a true pleasure in designing a space that people use so intimately. So I don't want to say that everyone was forced into it, because I think that some people really do enjoy it. But many women were forced into that residential kind of niche out of necessity, and also because maybe they were smaller scaled projects and maybe they could fit them around other household activities like taking care of kids and things like that.
For sure. Yeah. I think that we've found that in our research a little bit and whatnot. But I think to your point, some women probably just really enjoyed that work. I mean, I've always just liked residential. I think it's fun to kind of design a place that people spend a good majority of their life, right? But I do think that idea of like association, that social stigma of women in home was very tied. And it makes sense why a lot of them might be sort of pigeonholed into that.
Yeah. I would say the other thing about residential architecture, which I've recently become really interested in, I know we'll talk probably more about this, but many women historically were also involved in kind of larger scale residential projects as opposed to just the individual single family homes. They might have been designing apartment buildings or complexes of buildings, or even working for kind of the advocacy side about housing policies. You know, women's participation, yes, could be really specific to single family where they were relegated, but it does span other ideas about residential architecture as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's true. And I also think that even because of the social stigma of women being associated with the home, I also feel like they brought something to the design of residential in a way that men wouldn't have, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's no secret that some of the most basic ideas about how to lay out a kitchen were developed by a woman. The idea of the triangle in the kitchen, which I know some people say is not really needed anymore, isn't realistic. There was absolutely, as you're saying, Lizzie, a sense of expertise and knowledge that someone who didn't maybe spend time in certain areas of their own home wouldn't know. So I think there is some validity in the idea that they really were experts, and that did make them able to understand how it might be used efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been getting into this. Can we expand a little bit more on what are some of the themes or key things that might have come up in your research regarding women, and specifically women in residential architecture for UK?
This sort of ties into what we were talking about before, is that, you know, part of the reason why women were relegated to kind of this niche was because it was also seen as not as large scale and complex as more civic scaled or institutional buildings. And so there was an idea also that women weren't capable of doing something larger or doing something that involved multiple stakeholders or significant engineering. There was that idea that women couldn't do that. And so this not only was something that they had an expertise in, but that it was something they could kind of handle. So there's that theme is definitely reoccurring. But what you also see is that there were women that worked across kind of all scales, all locations, all design styles too. And many of these women were really prolific. I mean, you might think that, you know, okay, maybe there was a woman who went to school in the 1910s and maybe she designed her own home and her sister's home or something like that. And that certainly happened. But there are women like Minerva Parker Nichols, who was mostly based in Philadelphia, and she designed dozens of small and large private residences throughout the United States. And this is just an example of one of them. They're really, really thoughtfully designed. Many of them still stand today and are beloved by their homeowners. There was also Verna Cook Salomonsky, who practiced mostly in the New York suburb area. And she initially started her practice with her husband in the 1920s, and they focused on residential architecture. But she continued designing homes after he died. And by the end of her career, she had designed hundreds of homes. These are some really lovely examples in the suburbs of New York City. And you can see there's a variety of scale, of size. So in a way, one of the big themes is that it's really hard to pinpoint women in this niche as doing only one thing, because they could design a home for a small family on a very tight budget or something really large and grand. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind. I think the last maybe theme that here is just that no matter how good they were, no matter how prolific they were, a lot of these women were often first described by their gender, and they just couldn't escape it, whether it was from the contract or whether it was from their family or from their clients. I think also there are women who couldn't get out of it themselves and self-describe themselves as like a housewife and a mother. And then an architect might have been last, or maybe not even on the page. So I think those are some of the dynamics that we see when we look at this idea.
Yeah, for sure. Verna, by the way, kind of a teaser to people. We're going to talk about her this upcoming season. So I love that you mentioned her.
She actually, I have a lot of homes in my hometown outside of New York City.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. She's really fantastic work.
Yeah.
I also like that you brought up the fact that women couldn't escape that label of woman architect, because that's something that's come up a lot in our research, how women strived really hard to just be seen as architects.
Right.
And they would say things that today would sound really counterintuitive to me, because now I fully embrace the fact that I am a woman in architecture, but my realities are not the same as what they were living in that time. And so we have to look at it from that lens and understand what they were going through. And that's why they did the things they did and they acted the way they did sometimes.
Yeah. And I think Nordry, just like on top of that, the situation for women of color, for example, was, I kind of think of it as the double whammy. Not only were they a female architect, but they were also, for example, a Black architect, or they were also Latina, or like whatever else their identity was. It was often on top of being a woman. And so for Norma Sklarek, for example, I know you all have talked about her in previous episodes. That was really something that she basically said. She often felt actually like the issue of being a woman sometimes was maybe worse than the issue that she was Black. And for early female architect Ethel Bailey Furman, she also had similar issues where it was almost the fact that she was a woman made it more difficult for her to find projects than because she was Black, because she worked a lot within the Black community. And she often found that, people were more startled at the fact that she was a female architect than the fact that she was a Black architect.
And then for listeners out there, we have spoken about Norma Sklarek. She's episode 2. Ethel Bailey Furman is episode 78.
That's right.
See, you guys got everything covered.
No, there's so much more. But I like that you brought up the fact that she struggled being a woman in architecture, because that's something we talked about on the episode, how I think that she worked with Cesar Pelli, and he was the one, even though Norma was doing, obviously Cesar was doing a lot too, but he was the one that was client facing. They wouldn't present Norma to present the projects or meet with the clients. She was doing all the production, all the things in the back, if I may say it like that.
Yeah, behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes, thank you.
I would love to actually, so we just talked a little bit about some of your previous episodes, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your upcoming season and what people can expect to learn, what is surprising to you. I know you already mentioned that you're going to be talking about Verna Cook-Salomonsky. Anyone else we should keep our ears peeled for?
Yes, so many people. Well, just so that everyone knows, we are done with our research. Right now, we are recording all our episodes as they're being released. Our season starts next Tuesday, so watch out for that. You can expect 9 surprising stories about women in residential architecture and interior design across the world, not just the US. For example, one of my episodes is about Masako Hayashi, Nobuko Nakahara, and Hatsue Yamada. And the 3 of them together began their own architecture firm in Japan. And for me, that story was really rewarding because they established their own firm, Hayashi Yamada Nakahara Architectural Design Circle, in 1958. They came of age in Japan during World War II, so you can imagine how that affected how they viewed design in the world. And they also really considered how people use their own homes. For example, they questioned the importance of a tea ceremony space in houses because they noticed as time went by, those spaces were not really being used. They were just there to show a parent. One of my favorite projects of theirs is the Seashell Museum. I like to think of it as a house for seashells. And they really thought about how to display that for museum goers. And they also combined Japanese traditional designs with mid-century architecture principles and materials like concrete. Something that we talk about on our show is these women were really pioneers, not just being women, but the methods of constructions they were using. They were really experimental a lot of the time. So I was really excited for that.
Yeah, I did love the Seashell Museum. I thought that was fun. Just who comes up with that idea? I just love that. It's such a, you know what I mean? It was like, yes, let's have a museum for seashells. And wasn't it specifically oyster shells or something? I don't know. It's just very niche. Very niche.
Stay tuned. Listen to episode 131, She-Builds podcast, next Tuesday.
So Verna, like I mentioned, is one of the episodes that I worked on, but I'm also really excited about talking about Judith Chafee, a modernist residential architect from Tucson, Arizona. So her work is very striking, and she was really interested in vernacular architecture and the best way to design for each site, and specific to the climate in Arizona, with it just being so like arid, desert. And she did several projects where clients also had very specific health conditions that they worked around. And she has so many cool projects, but the Ramada house, which has this huge arbor, or Ramada, like which the project name suggests, and it plays with light and shadow in the spaces below it. It's just such a interesting kind of use of the light, especially in a place like Arizona, right, where there's so much sun all the time. And so anyway, I really loved learning about her.
I loved reading about her story. Okay, I know we're architects or designers, what have you, and her designs are really cool to look at, but I'm always interested in the story of why they do the things they do and how did they come to be. So Judith's story was really striking, just how she came to be. So you have a lot of things to look forward to this season. For me, what was exciting was a lot of our ladies that I'm sure has come up in your research, Kate, is that some of them might not be licensed architects, but how they came into architecture, a lot of it was like through international travel or apprenticeship. Like we mentioned, like Louise Bethune, she was one of those. So in this season in particular, I found more of that international travel, even if we do have international ladies, but just how they use that international travel to dictate how they designed the way that they did, especially in the realm of housing, and more specifically in public housing or in that multifamily space. Because we do have a lot of single family residential architects on our season, but I think one of the reasons why we're here today too is to talk about that, like public housing, affordable housing, since that's such a major topic in today's world. But to see that international influence and how they did things, I think is something that's exciting to see for this season, from history to today, which leads me to one of your more recent articles that you did, Kate. And I just wanted to ask, why did you decide to explore the topic of women in affordable housing?
I live in New York City, so housing and affordable housing is something you're always thinking about. But I think more broadly, affordable housing is having a really important moment right now. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are trying to find viable solutions for how to make housing more affordable between mortgage rates going up and the cost of building going up. It's kind of a touch point, a hot topic right now. I was interested in affordable housing from that aspect, but also because I know that, and I had learned a little bit through some early research a few years ago, how women were involved in some early affordable housing efforts. And so as I started to dive into that topic, I realized how rich it was. And it wasn't just women designing buildings and apartment buildings, but it was women advocating. It was women creating policy about affordable housing. It was women participating in kind of at the government level about affordable housing. And I realized that it was not just the design of buildings that women were involved with, but way more than that. And that was just so rich that I sort of had to talk about it and write about it.
I'm glad we are talking about it. We mentioned a little bit in our earlier conversations about how women might have been pigeonholed into residential architecture because they had, like the book that you mentioned, it's like American women's, like how they're in the kitchen, so they know how to design or whatever. Besides that, how do you think that that could be applied to something in a larger scheme that's not necessarily single family, but in a larger, in the same realm of affordable housing or in multifamily housing in particular?
The women's touch historically was less so maybe a literal touch and more about an understanding. And what some of the early architects did around the turn of the 20th century was both architects actually and advocates was that they literally went and lived in some of the poorest areas in some of the major cities to understand fundamentally how people were living, what kinds of issues they were dealing with. And even in a, let's say, a tenement building in the Lower East, New York City's Lower East Side in the 1890s, an immigrant family, typically the husband still would be out trying to, either at his job or trying to work, and the woman would be at home with her children. And so it would have been hard for men to go into that home or to go into that building and live there and be their neighbors and really get that kind of inside insight into how they lived. And yet there were women who were able to do that. And so, for example, the architecture firm of Alice, Gannon and Hands, they were some of the earliest architects, and I believe you guys covered them a while ago. And yeah, I'm seeing some nods. You all probably know, but they did some really incredible research when they were developing the design for a model tenement. And they literally went and lived in an apartment building and pretended to be factory girls and did their research. And I don't think that a man in that era they might have been able to do the same thing, but I don't think they would have established as close a relationship with their neighbors because simply men were typically out of the apartment building. So it's not so maybe much a women's touch, but more a women's perspective in the way that they were able to really connect with some of the people and understand their issues that they had. And I think that probably was maybe more about affordable housing and what they were able to do versus maybe how a woman's touch might impact a single family where it might be more personal knowledge that would impact their design.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We remember learning about that with those ladies. And I feel like it also makes me think of other examples, like not exactly the same, but Jane Addams with Hull House in Chicago, just kind of like wanting to be in the middle of it to really understand what the community's problems were or like issues that they were dealing with and how to design a better space for them or provide programs that they needed. And so that's kind of reminds me of that as well.
I was just going to say that that's exactly the same thing. I mean, they really took this idea of research and reform to heart. And I think they sort of modeled themselves after the settlement house movement, which was called the settlement house because they went and these reformers would settle in those neighborhoods. So that I think they really took those ideas to heart and brought them from the reform policy side of things and brought it to the architecture, research, design side of things.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. While we're talking about this too, there's been a lot of discussion on public housing and housing in general today. In the research that you've done in the past about women who've focused on this, whether it's settlement houses or kind of like going and living in these tenements, do you see similarities between today and this and the women of the past? Are there lessons we can learn from these women that you've researched?
I think one of the big standouts is basically that housing, especially affordable housing, has always been controversial. People are always very opinionated about it, and it's always been really complex. No wonder we haven't figured it out yet. We've just been trying to for hundreds of years, and I would say like really for modern housing for the past like 120, 130 years, and we still don't get it. We still don't have it right. So I think that's like one of the big takeaways that I have. But I think another really consistent discussion has been the role of private money versus the government. during the era that we were just talking about with the settlement houses, most of the settlement houses were created through the donation from wealthy people. So it was private money that funded them. And then people would not typically, some people might live in a settlement house, but they might act as kind of a community center. They might also help to build better apartment houses nearby in the neighborhood. But often those were really built by private money. However, then the Great Depression comes along and sort of everyone has no money. And so then really it shifts from private money being a way to try and fund some of these affordable housing projects towards the government. And that's when we see the establishment of HUD and a bunch of other kind of federal government sanctioned entities. Since then, we've sort of shifted back the other way and keep looking to private money to solve this problem. Or maybe we're somewhere in between now where it's a mixture of both. But whatever we're doing right now clearly isn't working as well as it probably could.
I'm going to switch gears. Kate, I'm wondering, what do you think are the broader repercussions of how we think about design and build housing when we ignore the people who shaped it from the beginning?
Yeah, well, I think you could say on the one hand, who cares? What we should care about is the building. Why would we care about who designed it and who built it and really just care about the building itself? But I sort of disagree with that. I think that I think it's important to give credit where credit is due. I think that is really meaningful and satisfying and important. And I think on the other hand, it's important to acknowledge things like creativity and good design and innovation. And a lot of these women, as we just talked about, did that, whether it was in their research methods or whether it was in the materials that they selected for the seashell house. It's so important to talk about that. And I think that there really is this broader goal of making women and their contributions known, to go and spend however many years in architecture school and not hear about a single female architect and their contributions to the built environment when it is everywhere around us, I think is really problematic. And I think it also makes those who are in school feel like there's no one who came before them and there's no one to look up to. And so I think those are really some of the issues when we don't talk about them. And I think that's why what you all are doing is just so important.
Thank you. Likewise, 100%. I just realized that I went from a hard subject to a harder one. So thank you for your insight. And building on that, do you think that some of these early female architects who designed residential projects had an impact on the women who are in practice in later years?
They definitely did. I can't say that anyone was as impactful as, let's say, Frank Lloyd Wright. I think there were so few in number, and their stories were kind of covered up for so many years that it's hard to quantify the impact they had. I can say that for me personally, they absolutely had an impact on me and my education and the way that I think about the built environment. And I'm sure it's not just me, I'm sure it's other people too, maybe you three as well. But I think that just thinking back to what the women were doing in that moment while they were practicing, a lot of women created sort of their own network. They often employed other women that they knew. They often sometimes taught in schools. There were a few, especially here on the East Coast, there were actually a few design schools that were exclusively for women. And so often women would end up teaching in those schools. So they might be someone that a student looked up to, and they might even end up hiring their students sometimes. So I think there was kind of a nice little network that they often created that impacted future generations down the line. I think the last thing maybe that about this too is that some of the women also had their work published, and they were written up either in design magazines or in newspapers. And they were written up and seen as kind of unusual and exceptions to the rule. But I do think that even just that moment where they were in the press might have given a woman reading the New York Times and hearing about Gannon and Hands and their tenement design, that might have inspired someone to go to school. I don't know specifically if that one story did, but I think that just having their stories out there and their work published did make that actually an opportunity or a possibility, as opposed to, no one knowing anything about them.
100%. not to toot our own horn, but we received an email one time of someone telling us that they had been thinking about architecture school for years
For
and they did
preservation grad school, some grad schooler.
something like that. Design, the built environment. And that listening to our show, it was that push they needed to think, you know what, I can do it. Other women have been doing it before me. I can do it too. So if our show and our little episodes made that impact, of course, the great impact that these early pioneers had on all of us is evident. I would put that out there.
Yeah, to your point, Kate, like even just one article could have inspired one person, and like that's not nothing. We love when we have episodes where women are recognized for their work while they're still alive, but I think again that goes to their reach going to other women and inspiring them to think that they can be part of the profession.
Absolutely. It's almost like there's no greater compliment for the podcast than hearing that you've inspired someone to kind of pursue their dream. That's really incredible. I'm also curious about how some of these stories impacted you all, kind of the flip side of that. Are there any stories or any work of the women that you're going to be talking about in the new season that might have inspired your own work or projects you're working on, or the way you think, or maybe future travel and where you want to go, and maybe there's a trip to the Seashell Museum in the near future? I'm really curious about that.
Well, Kate, we are always down for an arc adventure. We're always adding cities to our list of where we want to go. Just a quick reminder to the listeners, we do have about 10 minutes left in our webinar. Oh my God, time is going by so fast. So be sure to add questions and comments. We'll stick around a little bit at the end, and we are in the middle of recording. So if you have questions that we don't get to today, we'll include it in our wrap up for the season. But to your question, Kate, one thing we didn't mention, when we read that email from that listener that decided to go to grad school, we were all crying on a Zoom call because we were such a proud moment. It like boohoo crying. It was not pretty, but it was a beautiful moment. But for this season, for me, so I have 3 very different ladies that I'm talking about. I have one that she's an architect in Kansas City that did single family homes that still exist today. She's rumored to have designed the first house with an attached garage for her time. So that's kind of cool. And rumored that she had the first private pool in one of her designs for a client. It's a rumor because I don't think she's the first, but one of the first. And then I have Elizabeth Coy, she did a lot of affordable housing. I also have one that I'm really excited about because she's a socialist feminist who was totally radical, that was designing houses without kitchen. She had very strong opinions about gendered labor. So going to our earlier conversations, how do you design a house that doesn't have a kitchen? And what does that mean? And all the other community implications. So yeah, this season, we're in for a wild ride.
Going against the grain. Well, I already mentioned Judith Chafee, but I'm just inspired to visit Tucson, Arizona, which no offense at all to Tucson, but it wasn't really at the top of my list before learning about Judith. And I learned one of her houses is available to rent as an Airbnb or stay in it. So, I mean, I see a desert sojourn in my future,
In mine too.
Yeah. I mean, we all need to go.
She was pockets trip.
Agreed. With Kay, because she's a shoe builder too.
I'm there. I wasn't born for the desert. I hate the heat, but I'll do it. I'll for Judith, I will do it.
Well, answering the question about inspirations, I'm forever inspired by Lena Bobardi. She's episode 39, and she has 3 different charrettes and She Builds podcast. But focusing on this season, for me, episode 137 is Marie Croyer. She was an artist and interior designer from Denmark. And this lady was so resilient. When our school would not admit women, she and her friends started their own school, and they invited the most well-known artists of that time in Denmark to teach them and critique their work. Eventually, their school became part of the art school. They just couldn't be denied. And after that, as her career progressed, she did a lot of things, but she kept continually hitting not a glass ceiling. She was hitting a concrete ceiling. It was incredible. And I think about there came a point in her life where she kind of gave up. And I think about if she had known how far women would go, if she would have kept going, if she would have had the support that other women had in the field, would she have kept going? And I think about how important that is. On a lighter note, and on the other side of that spectrum, Masako, Nobuko, and Hatsue, they were really inspiring because, like we were mentioning, they were pioneers in concrete construction in Japan, and their body of work that they did together is so incredible. And they also did their own individual projects, and they taught in school, and they published books, and they continually supported each other throughout the profession. And I just think about how everything they're doing, we can do it too. All we need is to support each other, and how that drives for better design and a better world. I'm off my soapbox.
Do we have time for our last question, or we should probably we're cutting it close, I feel like.
In each episode, we usually highlight a caryatid. It's usually, the second half of our show where we highlight a woman today in the field. So, Kate, what about you? Who is a caryatid that you're admiring right now?
So I would say someone that I am constantly looking up to is someone who technically is not an architect. She's really a planner and a preservationist, but she's Erica Avrami, or Dr. Erica Avrami. She's a professor at Columbia in the architecture school, and specifically in the preservation program. She's just a lovely person, but I think really what inspires me, even beyond how thoughtful and lovely she is just the work that she does. So she looks at preservation and heritage and policy and planning, and then sustainability. And she really kind of looks at the intersection of all of those, as well as social justice, and really thinks about things like, is it true that the greenest building is the one that already exists? What are some of the tropes we have about social justice and the built environment, or about sustainability and an existing building? And she really dissects them thoughtfully, concisely, intelligently, and she just does really, really brilliant work that I find really inspiring. So I just would say she is my caryatid of the day.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate. Well, we have 2 minutes for questions.
I mean,
I received a friend of mine that couldn't make it today, made me promise that I would ask you, Kate, what is your favorite part about all the things that you do and writing your columns and journals and your research?
I would say my guilty pleasure is the digging. I love trying to find a chunk of research and like digging through the journals and scanning through ProQuest, trying to find the article I'm looking for, or trying to see if anybody was mentioned in the architectural press. I love the dig. And unfortunately, that also means that I will go down a rabbit hole, and suddenly I'll look up at my watch and it'll be 2 a.m. and the time will have flown. So I think that is really like when, I just am so involved and enveloped in the research that I really lose sense of time. That's one of the things I love the most. Although I do not like looking at the clock and seeing that it's, the middle of the night, and that I'm only going to get a couple hours of sleep because of that. So yeah, I would say that's my favorite aspect of it. I love the research dig.
I relate so much it hurts.
Nurjity, goes down research waterfalls or rabbit holes. She chases waterfalls, I should say. But I think we all enjoy that piece of it a little bit, just when you get on a topic and you just like really want to keep going with it.
I think our time's up. This has been so great. Kate, you know that we're major fans. We are following you on all the socials, staying up to date with Inc. Today, you've made new fans. Please tell them how to best follow you to continue learning.
My name is, it's my first name, Kate Bregev, 2 G's in there. You can also find me on Instagram. My Instagram tag is _Kreggy, KREGGY _. And yeah, those are probably the best ways to reach me.
Thanks so much, Kate. And thanks for joining us. It was a really great conversation.
you are welcome to have a chat anytime. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us today. Thank you to the Gābl Media fans for handling all of this. And then to remind everyone that for those Gābl Media members, to make sure you get your CEUs. And for those that aren't members, why aren't you a member? I mean, you can listen to us and get CEU credits. Like, what's up? And then as a reminder, it's gablmedia.com/members to get all that info. And also, just thank you to everybody. This is a great conversation to lead up to our season opener next week. Season 13, all things residential. So again, thank you everyone. Please look at shebuildpodcast.com for more information to subscribe. And see you next Tuesday.
Until next time.
Bye.